Hi everyone, Jared here, and I'm coming at you with a battle report from Battle at the Beltway. It was a 30-man grand tournament in Northern Virginia, and that just happened this past weekend. I am recording on a Friday. Now, I've never done any battle report like this before in this format, so please bear with me. I'm going to try to make it as concise and clear as possible. And truth be told, I have not played that many games of the old world. I believe Battle at the Beltway brought me up to just about 20. I've been to 3 tournaments though, and I have a lot of prior tournament experience. So I'm not like a noob, but obviously learning the new system still. And yeah. So in my list, I had a General of the Empire. He was mounted on an Imperial Griffin with the white cloak. He had a shield and full plate and a great weapon. I went with the great weapon because sometimes the Griffin tends to wind up in protracted combats, and having the additional 3 strength 6 attacks makes a big difference compared to a pip of armor save. I considered the lance. If you don't blow through, then the Griffin's attacks wind up being insufficient quite often, and you'll start to lose combats possibly. With the great weapon, the Griffin can definitely grind out combats. You're talking about 7 high strength attacks with armor piercing and stomps. And he comes in at 292 points, so it's a fair bargain. Plus, it extends his leadership range, which the Empire certainly doesn't mind. I had a Captain of the Empire. He was mounted on a Barded Warhorse. He had a Battle Standard, the Charm Shield, a Burning Blade, and the Dragon Bow. Dragon Bow is excellent. It's basically a ballistic skill 5 bolt thrower. So even when you're moving around, you have decent odds of hitting. It is strength 6, -2 armor, and does 2 wounds. Excellent. I gave him a Burning Blade because I had no magic weapons in the list. And you certainly don't want to pay for an expensive magic weapon on the Griffin because your general only has 3 attacks. So the Burning Blade was basically an emergency weapon in case I ran into Ethereal. Because he's got the static res from the BSB, having a magic weapon, he can go into Ethereal units and actually win a protracted combat, depending on what they are, depending on the circumstances. It just makes it, if he's in the night unit with some static res, makes it a little scarier versus having my entire list be utterly vulnerable to ethereals, which we'll talk about in one of these games. I have a Wizard Lord. He's a level 4. He's on a Pegasus. He's got the Ruby Ring of Rune, a lore familiar, so he picks his spells. And at literally the last moment before I could submit the list on time, I switched from battle magic to elementalism. I knew there would be a ton of battle magic. Everybody's taking battle magic. It's a little boring. Elementalism, yes, is very popular, but I haven't played with it, and I really wanted to give it a try in this list. I had some visions of what I could do with it, and I quite liked it. There's an Empire Engineer. He's naked. I have, for my core, 11 Empire Knights. They are drilled. They have a champion, standard, with the war banner. I gave the champion the silver horn, and they are basically they're filling out my core, but they're a bit of a static res brick. They can go into some combats. They're not absolutely miserable, and they can absorb a charge from a big thing at least 1 turn with the champion. I have a 5-pack of Empire Knights. They also have drilled. This is so if they go on the flanks, they can advance with a triple move through marching, and they're cheap enough. They're 115 points, and they can beat up lighter things. And then I took 10 state missile troops with crossbows. They also have drilled and a sergeant. The reason for these guys is I wanted another scoring unit based on the conditions of the tournament. Then for special, I had 4 Demigriff Knights. They had lances, full plate, champion, standard. I had 2 great cannons, and I had a steam tank. A real quick note about the steam tank. This is one of the main pieces why I wanted to have elementalism and got curious about how it would perform. The reason being is the steam tank is fairly immobile. It moves 4 inches, and then you have to roll dice to march further. So that randomization, sometimes it falls short. Having traveled the mystical pathway and the ability to pick it up and place it 12 inches away from where it started is incredibly useful. On top of that, earthen ramparts, because it's often not charging, but sitting there as a roadblock, taking away 1/3 of the damage that they finally get through to a toughness 7, 3+ armor save, 10 wound roadblock that's unbreakable is also tremendous. So this combination, it just was very appealing to me. And then on top of that, Plague of Rust really helps. And it didn't come up as often as I thought it would, but it's a great spell, and everybody, with the 21-inch range, being able to target combats, it is very good. And then on top of that, you have Wind Blast, which is, while it's a shorter range magic missile, it's very easy to cast. It's 15 inches is sufficient, especially since they're giving ground a couple of inches. And D3 plus 3 strength 5 with an AP of 1 is it's very hitty and useful. So those are the 4 spells that I would tend to take. There was one game where I took Summon Elemental Spirit, and loved Elementalism. It was really good. Okay, let's talk about the first game. I drew my first round opponent. It was Blue Ford, and he had a Wolves of the Sea Chaos list. This was one of the lists I had looked at before the tournament, and it looked really bad for me, so I wasn't thrilled with the matchup. Blue's also an experienced player and hosts a bunch of tournaments on the East Coast, so he knows what he's doing, and you could tell from the list. He had a Chaos Lord on a Dragon, Paymaster Coin, Ogre Blade, 2 times Favor of the Gods, Enchanting Aura, Mark of Nurgle, full plate and a shield. So this was not the most defensive dragon, but still it's a 10 wound dragon. A level 2 wizard on a demonic mount with lore familiar, battle magic, and a spell familiar. That was it for characters. He had a bunch of Marauder Tribe Berserkers of various sizes, 3 units of Chaos Warhounds, 2 of them had Vanguard. He had a small unit of Huskarls, Mark of Corn, with flails, and 2 gigantic spawn of Nurgle, and 3 individual dragon ogres. So this is an MSU chaos list. It's very hard to extract points from. Everything that's worth points is pretty tough, and he has a ton of drops. And one of the problems with this list is that, for me playing Empire, is that one of my advantages is I'm playing War Machines. I have very few drops. I get to typically get the +1 for first turn. Versus the Wolves of the Sea, I have to fight a challenge versus one of his flail dudes who has ASF. And I believe it's the Huskarl champion. And he's going to smash any one of my champions. And so not only will I lose a champion, but I will also not get the +1 to go first in a game where I really want to get that first turn shooting. And on top of that, he has so many drops, he gets to see exactly where everything of mine goes, where most of it is worth a lot more points than his. So definitely not a matchup I was looking forward to. The scenario we were playing was to capture table slices that went diagonally. And here you can see my deployment. What I decided to do was to deploy the cannons on a hill for line of sight purposes with some of my minor elements like the crossbows and the 5-pack of knights for support. The steam tank went centrally, and all my other units went far on the opposite flank. The idea being he would have to focus on all my combat units where the points were, and plus I have my elemental teleport to kind of shuffle the way things are arranged around. And if not, he could go for the gun hill where a lot of cheap points were. He had such a unit advantage. I didn't want to concentrate everything in such a way where he would have me surrounded with a dragon running free to do whatever it wanted. Putting everything in one place also expedites the game, because there's so many points available. After you hit one thing, there'll be something else lined up for it. So the idea was spread my points out, give myself room to maneuver, have the ability to fly over my Pegasus, teleport something out of the way, try to prolongate the amount of shooting I can get, It didn't seem likely with the amount of small units that could all take on cannons or any of my lighter units, but that was the plan I came up with. So after deployment, I was immediately confronted with a problem, which was, what did I want my cannons to target? Do I want to focus fire on the dragon, hope to get lucky, maybe take it below half because we were scoring half points for monsters below half? The odds of me killing it were pretty low. Even though it only has the 5-up ward, it has a ton of wounds, and I had a lot of good targets. Individual dragon ogres can be killed with one shot of a great cannon. I was also worried, looking at the way the table was, that I would just lose the hill, do a few wounds to the dragon, not have killed anything, versus removing some serious problems with those dragon ogres. So I decided to actually focus fire on them. I thought the crossbows had a potential shot of reducing the Huskarls to being vulnerable to the knights. So what wound up happening was I put 3 wounds on each of the dragon ogres. After getting one down to 1 wound, I didn't want to throw another cannonball at it to finish it off, especially since they weren't going to be engaged just yet. My steam tank misfired, took a wound from itself. I killed a couple of Huskarls. I teleported the steam tank after earthen ramparts went off towards the middle of the board in order to kind of give him a choice of how much he wanted to concentrate on the steam tank versus the rest of my army, and put it in a position where it could possibly charge. Notably, the angle Blue had put his dragon at allowed me to teleport 12 inches and be just out of his line of sight, forcing him to face it down with just the marauders and the dragon ogres. I managed to panic one of the units of dogs with a magic missile. My dragon bow missed its shot, and that's why both dragon ogres that were wounded survived. Blue's turn 2, he got the arcane urgency that he had failed turn 1 off, and the spawn zipped all the way over in front of my knights. The Huskarls took a charge on the cannon, which decided to flee off, and they arrived right in front of the crossbows. The middle dragon ogre with 1 wound left, and I believe it was a 5-pack of the marauders with flails, charged the front of the steam tank to try to get additional wounds. They only did 1 wound. The dragon ogre got ground to death, and the marauders fell back, and I went after them. On the right flank, Blue used his other unit of dogs to angle in front of my night brick in order to stall them if they charged. He used this in coordination with a unit of ambushers that came behind them, so now I was trapped either taking a charge that brought me closer to the dragon or risking a rear charge. Then on the bottom of 2, my crossbows on the left managed to kill all 3 remaining Huskarls, which was very fortunate. I took the charge of the knights into the spawn, hoping that something fluky might happen. This was probably a little bit of thrown away points, but they were trapped either way. On the right side, I declined to charge the knights and instead charged the BSB into the dogs because that was an easy win. Instead, I cast Mystical Pathway and moved the knights to the other side of the house towards the middle of the table so that they were no longer vulnerable to that rear charge. In combat, the 5-pack got absolutely smashed by the spawn. The remaining knight fled but stayed on the table. The BSB was able to break the dogs, did not catch them, while my Griffin General flew alongside the windmill out of line of sight of the dragon and out of arc of the spawn. Blue had a pillar of fire that then killed my great cannon outright and killed most of the rest of the crossbows. He committed the dragon into the night brick. The BSB was out of line of sight. 2 marauder units and the full dragon ogre went into the flanks of the steam tank, and 1 marauder unit went into the griffin. The steam tank combat went well for me. He only got a wound through, and I actually won the combat and ran down the dragon ogre with my grinds. The griffin held off the marauders, and they fell back in good order. But my luck failed where I needed it most. I had really hoped that that knight unit would be able to delay the dragon for at least a couple of rounds. Instead, he killed the champion. He fluffed the combat. He won by only 1. And despite my reroll, I broke and fled off the table, which was absolutely brutal. Fortunately, my wizard did not fail his panic test. On my next turn, with this massive points loss, it became a game of mitigation more than anything. I knew the dragon was going to be able to score whatever was in his line of sight, and unfortunately, the steam tank seemed to be the best target. So my griffin came over to the corner where his marauders were. I moved my BSB over as well, and my wizard hung around that area. These were all out of charge arcs. My demigriffs advanced on the spawn, which was facing the wrong way, in hopes that I could pick up those points. The steam tank took a long charge on his wizard to at least get him to flee, which he did. I did not catch him, and my magic missiles sufficed in killing all but the champion of the marauder unit that was occupying my corner slice. On Blue's next turn, he went into the back of the steam tank. His spawn did an about face, and his marauders hid by the windmill. On my turn, I cleared out that last marauder to completely remove him from my slice. He did get points for having ever occupied it. My demigriffs went 4 wide to prepare for the spawn, and I had set them up so that they would be, I believe it was a 14-inch charge away with the wheel. So they were close where I would likely get in with the spawn if I got the charge, and it would likely not get into me if it got the charge. His dragon beat up the steam tank but didn't kill it. Then on his turn, the spawn rolled a 17-inch charge, went into the demigriffs, and unfortunately they lost by 1, and with terror they broke, and then the spawn ran them down. Beyond that, there was not much notable other than magic missiles clearing off some of Blue's chaff, and the rest of my units kind of hiding. My griffin did kind of occupy the middle, and it was in a position on the bottom 6 to fly into Blue's slice, so I wound up getting some bonus points from that. After we did the math and counted up the bonus points, it wound up being a 16-8 to Blue, which is not a devastating loss for me. Obviously, I had hoped to extract more points and not lose my points quite as fast as I did. The demigriffs really stung. I'm not sure if I played this game correctly, to be honest. I think I could have gone for the dragon, maybe halved it. Maybe that would have made him play with it a little differently, because at full wounds, there was nothing on my side of the table that could really handle it. And I think he was able to play with it pretty fearlessly. But even before that, with deployment, I'm not sure if splitting my forces the way I did was a good idea, if maybe I should have put more of a threat on that side of the table. The problem is that there's not a lot I have that can handle the spawn either. I did expect the demigriffs to be able to take them on, but he got the charge, and it's pretty risky at that point. Like, if I get the charge, I get my lance attacks, it's a little bit better. And circumstances were what they were, so they just got completely rolled, which was disappointing. So I'm really not sure if I played this one right. I'd be curious to hear what you all think. I thought it was a bad matchup. I did not want to play into this list, and I think it went about how I expected it to. So I was hoping for better luck in my next round. So when I looked at who I had round 2, I saw it was Philip Marsingill, who was playing Tomb Kings, which I had not played in a previous event or at all. And his list was a Tomb King. He was on a War Sphinx with Armor of the Ages, Flail of Skulls. He had a High Priest level 4, Lore Familiar Flying Carpet on Necromancy, a Royal Herald BSB with Amulet of the Serpent and Armor of Meteoric Iron, 21 Tomb Guard with a Standard and Champ, 27 Skeleton Archers. They were going to get poison from the BSB. He had 3 Skeleton Chariots filling out his core, 3 Carrion, 2 Tomb Scorpions, a Screaming Skull Catapult with Skulls of the Foe, a Necrosphinx, and the Casket of Souls. So I spoke to Phil Carl, who is a very experienced Tomb Kings player and one of the best players in the East Coast, and he gave me a rundown of how his list worked. And I knew some of it, but I wasn't too familiar, so that was really helpful before the game. So I kind of knew what I was doing going into it. You can see here that game 2 was using flank deployment, which kind of threw me for a little bit of a loop, but there was a special deployment feature where we would have flanking forces, so it would be a matter of giving my cannons enough of a supporting force to go on the flanks, defend if they happen to be across from his secret flankers, and get nice angled shots on all those monsters. I knew I really wanted to kill the casket because it was not only easy to shoot with cannons, but also kind of a linchpin of his army. So that was target priority number one. But he also had two large monsters, so I really wanted shots at most of this stuff. And as it turned out, I picked the opposite flank of his flanking force, which was really good for me because he was barren on that flank, so my cannons were fairly safe. I had I had given it a supporting unit of knights, the 5-pack, and they were able to maneuver around the tower, as you will see. As you can see from the photo, I didn't take a picture of the deployment, but Phil's flanking force was rather substantial, with his Sphinx, Carrion, and unit of chariots and catapult all on my right flank. My flanking force was pretty unmolested, with just his general being behind the tower. So I wouldn't be getting shots at it easily with the cannons, but I did have a line of sight to the casket. So my turn one, I advanced around the hill. I tried to angle so that none of his stuff could get an easy flank charge into mine. The crossbowmen had an assignment which was ideally to march to occupy his side of the table, because if you looked at the mission pack, there was a bonus point in store for that, and I did not think they would be able to do much else. One notable and interesting thing about Phil's play was that he did not have his scorpions in ambush. So that was a relief to me because I didn't have to account for them coming up anywhere. I'm not sure if it's better to keep them threatening alongside other units, use them as redirectors, but in this case, I felt relieved because I didn't have to even think about it. My initial cannon shots went after the casket, and I had a couple of misfires. And I believe I slipped a wound or two through, but did not kill it, and they were all healed. I did get a fireball off on Scorpion and actually managed to kill it outright, which was very lucky. And his turn, he advanced up the flank, shot his catapult. It went wayward. He dropped his necromancy template, and the poison shots went after the griffin and slipped one wound through. So Phil's turn two, he did something that was a little bit of a surprise, and the Sphinx and the Carrion charged my knights, and I declared a countercharge. The magic phase focused down my 5-pack that was swinging around his flank on my left side and obliterated them. And the combat went well. I believe I wounded the Sphinx and killed the Carrion. Killed a couple of knights in return, but my static res was enough to win me the combat. He pushed both of his units back, and I restrained and reformed. My next turn was a big one. I declared a charge with my demigryphs into his archer unit, and the crossbows charged his Carrion. The knights walked around his Sphinx after the restrain and reform, and lined up with the griffin, and the steam tank advanced in front of the tomb guard. The crossbows lost their combat and actually got pushed back 2 inches. The Carrion followed up, but the demigryphs did their job and killed a bunch of archers and pushed them back 2 inches to get out of the tomb guard's line of sight. On his turn, he declared a charge with the chariots into the flank of the demigryphs that were engaged with the archers and failed it and fell short. The Sphinx turned around, and the Carrion actually flubbed their combat with the crossbows and dissolved. On my turn, I charged the Griffin and the Knights into the flank of the chariots, which extended the Knights after they made a drilled maneuver to have a potential overrun into the Skull Catapult. That succeeded. They obliterated the chariots and overran successfully into the catapult. The demigryphs were able to finish off the unit of archers and until it was just a BSB remaining, and he was going to lose and dissolve, as would the Skull Catapult. Phil wound up sending his general and the Scorpion into the steam tank. He turned his tomb guard around. After I was through his whole line, I had moved my wizard and my BSB over to shoot his Hierophant, who they killed. The demis, having looped around, faced the tomb guard. The griffin also faced them. I had a subsequent charge into the tomb guard. The knights went for the +1 bonus point for going into his flanking choice on his deployment zone. The king and the scorpions did massive damage to the steam tank, and melted it a little faster than I thought it would. But I killed all the Tomb Guard, and what wound up happening in the end of the game was he declared a charge with his general against the Griffin, and knowing I couldn't take that, I just fled and allowed him to score half the points. I believe he failed his redirect into the demis, and my BSB panicked off the general fleeing. So ultimately, as you can see, the game went pretty well for me. I was fortunate to make that demigriff charge. The knights deflected the Sphinx and were able to maneuver around, and once the demis got in with the archers and he didn't have a counter charge set up, I was able to roll that entire back end, turn around, and then also get the Tomb Guard because the general and the Scorpion were preoccupied with my steam tank, which took a while to kill. So it couldn't have gone much better, and I got a 20-6 victory. So that was a nice bounce back from round 1. For game 3, I was playing against Jackson Hickey. He had a Master Necromancer, level 4, who was his general with a spell familiar, Scepter of De Nurat, Necromancy. He had a Strigoi Ghoul King, Terrorgeist, Crown of the Damned, Giant Blade, Dark Acolyte with Battle Magic, 2 Tomb Banshees, a White Lord with a Great Weapon, Heavy Armor, and the BSB. He had 24 Graveguard with Great Weapons, Seneschal, Standard Bearer with the Standard of Hellish Vigor, and a Musician, 15 Crypt Ghouls, 2x4 Spirit Hosts, and 7 Hex Wraiths. The scenario we were playing was breakpoints, and all the bonus points involved capturing standards, breaking your opponent, not being broken, and also getting a unit into your opponent's zone. So this was probably the other list that I really did not want to play at the tournament. Ethereals are just very difficult for Empire. We don't have high output characters, so we don't really take very many magic weapons. We do have good magic because our wizards are cheap, so magic missiles are the answer, but there were a lot of ethereal bodies here. Our leadership's mediocre. So I was looking at my list, and I did not think there were many avenues to victory. He did have the Strigoi Ghoul King, and it was riding a Terrorgeist, which meant I had a big target for my cannons, but it has Crown of the Damned, so it had a very potent protective item. And I was thinking, okay, well, if I can kill the Ghoul King with shooting, if I can drag the game out, kill the Ghoul King, remove that threat, use my missiles to score one of his other units, I could possibly edge out the game. The Hex Wraiths were my other target priority number 1 because they had great weapons. There were 7 of them, and I just couldn't have a mobile ethereal threat flying around rolling up my flanks. So I really needed to remove those with missiles and have the War Machines work on the Ghoul King. Then I would be in a decent spot, but that's a lot of must-have happens in a game of dice. One note on spells is that for this game, I did not take Plague of Rust and instead took Summon Elemental Spirits because having one more template that could do magical damage seemed like the play for sure. He didn't really have any armor anywhere. I won the roll-off for table sides, which was good, and I also won first turn, so that was pretty clutch for me. I felt like I needed that to go my way. We were playing on a desert table, and there were large pieces of what we determined to be impassable terrain, so those were going to dictate the game. From my perspective, that funneled him into a place where my steam tank might be able to disrupt some of his less hitty units. And keep in mind that the plan was to remove the Hex Wraiths and hopefully the Ghoul King, so then I would be able to jam the rest up with the stank. Here you can see the deployment and the start of the game. I deployed the crossbows first all the way on the left, and it managed to get him to drop a unit of Spirit Hosts over there, and for me this was a win because it took them out of the line and I did not really care about the crossbows. The rest of my units deployed centrally with the one cannon on the hill, the other cannon towards the back. I didn't want them cramming together so that they wouldn't be killed together by his rapid elements. The knights went to the far right flank, and everything else was in the middle-ish. I used the large piece of terrain to hide my griffin behind. Turn 1, I managed to get a wound on his Ghoul King, and I killed 3 of the Hex Wraiths. I also cast Elemental Spirit and had that template out directly in front of his Hex Wraiths. An important note for this game is that I asked Jackson right away if he wanted a beer, and he was like, hell yeah, so we started drinking. So my notes are a bit spotty for this one, and I don't have all the pictures, but I think I have it mostly covered. Jackson's turn 1, you can see he advanced. His Hex Race moved right up to the Elemental Spirit template. His line moved up. He healed all the wounds on the Hex Wraith. He also decided to turn the Spirit Hosts that were across the crossbows towards his line. I think he was worried about having enough units to deal with the Griffin flying over. And so that left the left side of the table completely open. And as you can see, he cast a spiritual vortex directly across from my knights. On my turn 2, because the crossbows had no opposition, they used their drilled to narrow their formation and start their march across the table as there was a battle point on the line. My Griffin used the newly refaced Spirit Hosts to find a little nook behind the impassable terrain facing off against his ghouls where it could not be charged by any ethereals. Most importantly, the elemental spirits directly went back through the Hex Race, did a big chunk of damage, and I was able to take them off entirely with my magic missiles. The cannons all fired at his Ghoul King, and between that and my magic phase, he took 5 wounds, leaving him with 4 wounds remaining. On Jackson's turn, he didn't really have any charges, so he advanced the Ghoul King so that it would threaten the entirety of my right flank. The Spirit Hosts moved up, his ghouls spread out, but he failed to get any damage through in the magic phase. He did manage to heal 2 of the wounds on the Ghoul King. My following turn was all about mitigating the damage the Ghoul King could do, while hopefully killing him with the cannons. Because of the impassable terrain in the middle of the board, I felt like my demigriffs had no real good options, so I decided to left face them, and they began the long walk around the big piece of terrain. On the right, I used drilled to form up the 5-pack of knights into a marching column and get out of the Ghoul King's arc. And my biggest decision in the movement phase was what I wanted to do with the steam tank. I succeeded in casting Mystical Pathway, turned the tank sideways, and put it near that large central piece of terrain. I figured this would really jam up most of his army, and the knights shuffled leftward. I did something risky here with my wizard because I thought I saw an opportunity. I flew it between the Ghoul King and the Lone Banshee and decided I was going to try to magic missile that Lone Banshee if I possibly could, after I saw what the cannons did to the Ghoul King. In my shooting phase, all 3 cannons hit the Ghoul King. All 3 cannons rolled a 1 to wound. Both of my magic missiles failed to cast. The Griffin went into the ghouls, and it won the combat as expected. On Jackson's turn, the Spirit Hosts go into the flank of the steam tank, which they really had no choice. The Ghoul King eats a cannon. The Banshee that survived the magic missile barrage decides to charge my wizard. I have to flee because if I get stuck in that, I might be broken and run down. And the Griffin once again beats up on the ghouls. He did manage to get Unquiet Spirits off on my BSB. The angle was such that it was the closest target, and he killed the BSB. On my turn, disastrously, the wizard failed to rally. So what I wound up doing is using drilled on my 5-pack to spread them out wide and block line of sight so the Banshee couldn't subsequently then charge my wizard off the table and gave me another chance to rally. My knights faced to start heading left along with the demigriffs totally bailing on the battle because I figured the steam tank would be there forever. The Griffin was able to finish off the ghouls as expected. On Jackson's turn, the Ghoul King turned after killing the cannon and took his charge on the knights. The knights fled. He redirected into my other cannon. The Banshee, no longer able to charge my wizard, decided to scream at the 5-pack and wipe them out. My next turn, the wizard finally rallied. He used his magic to kill that Banshee that was hunting him down. The engineer ran around the hill. I continued my leftward march. The knights fortunately rallied. The steam tank generally wasn't taking any wounds from the Spirit Hosts, and they had the flank, and I had close order, so we continued to just push. At this point, basically my entire army was running away. The other Banshee came out, and I managed to kill it with a magic missile. The Ghoul King pursued those knights, flying close to set up for a final turn charge, and the rest of my army was long gone. In that final charge, the Ghoul King went in, wiped out the champion. The knights lost the combat, but they passed the test and only gave ground. The game ended. We added up the points. I had 538. He had 492. With our bonus points, It was a dead even draw, 11 to 11. I actually felt pretty good about getting a draw in this game. It seemed like if I didn't kill the Ghoul King, I was going to get rolled, but the Steam Tank teleport bought me enough time where I was able to use that giant piece of impassable terrain to get my army out of the way, and it jammed him up so that he was piling up on himself. I was pretty lucky with the screams also. Basically, the only devastating scream that got through was the one on the 5-pack of knights. Otherwise, it was like a wound here or there, and his magic didn't wind up doing much, whereas my magic came through, killed the Hex Wraith, killed the Banshees. Luckily, I didn't lose the level 4. I mean, I definitely made a couple of mistakes taking that gamble and leaving my BSB where there was an angle to be closest and get spelled off. So I was lucky to get away with a draw. I think I played overall pretty well, but that was definitely a skin of my teeth game. Just wanted to give a particular shout out to Jackson because we were knocking a few beers back, having a great time, and he was a real pleasure to play, and it was very nice to meet him. So that stood out to me on day 1. Okay, day 2, I was 1-1-1, and I was facing off against a High Elf list run by Paul Loester. He had an Archmage with Shadowstalker, level 4, Battle Magic, Bow of Averlorn, and the Silvery Wand. A Noble, he had Pure of Heart. He was on a Griffin with Full Plate, Dragon Helm, Seed of Rebirth, Opal Amulet, a great weapon. He had a Prince. He was riding a Star Dragon. He had Full Plate, Shield, Dragon Slaying Sword, Seed of Rebirth, and the Opal Amulet. His core was 7 Illyrian Reavers with a Harbinger. He had 5 Elven Archers, 5 Elven Archers. He had an 8-pack of Silver Helms with a High Helm and a Standard Bearer with a War Banner, 5 Shadow Warriors, 2 Lothern Skycutters, 8 Sisters of Averlorn, 8 more Sisters of Averlorn. Round 4, as you can see, used Mountain Pass deployment. The bonus points were for destroying a scoring unit, grabbing table quarters with the most unit strength, if your most expensive non-character or monster survived the game, and if you had more banners on the table than your opponent by the end of the game. Given the scenario and what his list contained, particularly the Star Dragon, I knew that I wanted to prolong my shooting as much as possible. I felt like I'd have a decent chance at scoring one of the monsters if I managed to deploy as far back as possible, take my shots, and give him some questions on his way in. I also knew that his faster elements and his additional skirmishing units could not surround me with the narrower deployment. He did have scouting, so I was able to plug up my entire side of the board with deployment. That was a nice bonus. And overall, I felt the scenario favored me. My first drop, as usual, was the crossbows on a hill. I kind of wanted to just throw them out there. They can do damage against high elves. The demigryphs and the knights deployed where there was the most space to operate, with the steam tank alongside the griffin, and then the 5-pack was on my far right flank. The 2 cannons deployed on the far back right behind the runes. Hopefully I would disrupt any elements that tried to move through with that piece of terrain. I did once again win table sides and get the roll for first, so that was a nice bonus as well. My turn 1, I shot my cannons at one of the Skycutters. 2 cannons hit, but only managed to do 3 wounds and didn't kill it. The crossbows and the fireball killed 3 Reavers, and I cast Earthen Ramparts on the steam tank. On Paul's turn 1, he generally advanced. He moved the dragon and the griffin out from behind the large piece of impassable terrain. The Tyrannox moved up as well. Bowfire killed 2 of the 5-pack knights and managed to panic them, and they ran close to the cannon. I lost 3 crossbows to Bowfire, but they passed their panic. The steam tank, however, did manage to suffer 2 wounds despite its armor and regen save, thanks to a 12-hit fireball. On the top of 2, I cast another Earthen Ramparts on the steam tank. I also managed to get Plague of Rust off on the Reavers to set them up from a charge for the crossbows. My shooting took out the other's Skycutter chariot. Most importantly, I managed to get off a portal on my steam tank, and I measured the angle and got it just out of line of sight of the dragon. I decided if he wanted to take the griffin charge and perhaps the knights, it would be perfectly fine with me to tie them up and give me time to deal with the dragon. The crossbows failed their opportunity and did absolutely no damage to the Reavers. They lost combat and got pushed back 2 inches. Also, one more thing of note is I moved my griffin over to cover that end of the table once my knights had panicked. though they did rally. Oh, and I almost forgot. I did 3 wounds to the dragon with my cannons. On Paul's turn, he took what charges he had. The Reavers went back into the crossbows along with the Sky Cutter that was remaining. The dragon advanced, as did the 5-pack of archers alongside it. They were kind of running in the middle as a disruptor. If I wanted to clear them, I was exposing myself to the dragon countercharge, so I definitely was not going to charge them. The Griffin failed to get through the steam tank's defenses and did no wounds. However, predictably, I suffered a loss of the crossbow combat. The 2 remaining crossbows fell back in good order, with the Illyrian Reavers following up. I'm a little unclear on what exactly happened in this combat. I believe the Demigryphs wiped out the chariot and took an overrun into the Illyrian Reavers. Because I fought that combat first, then moving to the Reavers and crossbows, I got to fight again with the Demigryphs. The crossbows both died, but the Demigryphs wiped out the Illyrian Reavers. Notably, this turn, the dragon bow and cannon took the dragon down to 1 wound remaining. The steam tank was able to get a wound through, and that combat was a push. On Paul's turn, with the dragon at 1 wound and facing down more gunfire, he decided to gamble, and the dragon charged the Demigryphs. A fireball went off, did 3 wounds to the 5-pack of knights, but none got through. When we got to the combat, the dragon died to the Demigryphs, completely failing to damage them. Maybe if they started with 1 wound, people wouldn't sweat him so much. At this point, Paul advanced his archers to defend the flank of the Griffin. The Demis wound up charging them. They overran into the Griffin, who challenged. He wound up killing the Preceptor with multiple wounds. Won the combat. The Demis broke. The Griffin was finally able to get into the combat with his Griffin. The Demis were subsequently charged by his sisters and ran between the Night Block and the Griffin into the ruins. The Griffin would kill his Griffin. The Demis rallied. I ran down the Reavers. The Knights chased off the sisters, after which the Griffin was able to get into his archer bunker with the mage, and that was pretty much a wrap. The result was a 24-1. I was able to get all the bonus points. This game kind of felt set up for me to win because I had the extra distance from the dragon. So he had to go into these void zones, and I had the space to hide back and let my cannons do work. They didn't fail me, which was a big deal. And I wasn't under much pressure from anything other than the dragon. I was able to get the steam tank combat I wanted. I have no problem with a Griffin grinding it. It takes forever, so it buys me time and removes another one of his threatening pieces. Allowed me to focus on the dragon. That worked out. Game 5. So for Game 5, we drew into Dan Brewster, who had a Chaos Army. He had a Sorcerer Lord with a hand weapon, heavy armor, Mark of Tzeentch, level 4, Chaos Steed, Infernal Puppet, Spell Familiar, Ruby Ring on Battle Magic. He had a Chaos Lord with a lance, full plate, shield, Mark of Chaos, undivided, General on a Chaos Dragon with 2 Favor of the Gods, Armor of the Damned, Brazen Collar, and Enchanting Aura. He had 2 7-man units of Chaos Knights with Mark of Khorne, 5 Marauder Horsemen with Mark of Tzeentch, 3 Dragon Ogres in 1 unit with Great Weapons, and he had 2 Gigantic Spawn of Chaos. 1 was Khorne, 1 was Nurgle. For the scenario, we were playing a classic deployment. The twist on it was an innovation item that you could give. One was your first Fated Dispel would be on 3d6 instead of 2d6. A non-character or monster unit could gain magic resistance -2. After deployment, before determining who went first, you could redeploy up to 1 unit that is not a character or single monster. You could have a unit champion gain a Fireball bound spell with power level 1. Or you could have a single scoring unit get double rank bonus. In this scenario, characters and champions could not refuse challenges. The bonus points were +1 for your lowest unit surviving, +1 if you killed your opponent's most expensive non-character unit, +1 if you had more scoring units than your opponent at the end of the game, +1 if you killed a character in a challenge during the game, and +1 if you kept the enemy out of your deployment zone at the end of the game. There were several good items that you could get through the innovations, and I wasn't exactly sure which the right one to choose was. I went with what I thought was the safest choice, which was an additional bound spell for Fireball. One of my considerations was the redeploy, because I thought that was quite powerful, but Ultimately, I looked at the table, and my side of the table seemed to tell me where things were going to go, so I wasn't sure I would be redeploying. MR2 would have also been very good, as would Fated Dispel of 3d6. The table was fairly symmetrical. As you can see in my deployment, my 5-pack went to the far right. This was mirrored by his Chaos Knights. I then deployed 10 crossbows across from his second Chaos Knight unit. It seemed to me like they could get some chip damage and probably would just wind up fleeing and hover around my backfield. That was the plan anyway, to keep them alive since they were worth a battle point. The hill was perfect for the cannons. He would either have to be out of line of sight of them, hop over, and then stand in front of them. And going to the far side on that hill gave them flank shots to where the knights were, so it seemed pretty optimal. And then my main units were deployed somewhat centrally, steam tank in the middle. That gives me the most flexibility, and it also gives me another angle for a cannon shot. For Dan's part, he kept almost everything out of line of sight of the cannons that was worth shooting at, other than the knights. His dragon was behind the building. The dragon ogres were also tucked at an angle behind the building, and the 2 spawned behind them. For Dan's spells, he notably missed Arcane Urgency, and I was pretty pleased with that. Oh, and one more thing about the scenario. I did put the bound fireball on my Preceptor and the Demigryphs. You can see that on my turn 1, I advanced the Griffin and the Wizard to kind of hover behind that building. Basically, I was aiming for flanks that he would have to give me if he wanted to come out from behind the building. I knew my Griffin wasn't going near the dragon. The Knights kind of angled towards where the dragon might land. The steam tank advanced where it could get an angle shot on the back corner of the dragon. The Demigryphs wheeled and aligned themselves alongside the crossbows. Combined, my cannons killed 5 of the farthest flank Chaos Knights, and my steam tank managed to get a wound on the dragon. I did 12 hits to the dragon ogres with a fireball, and killed 1, and I think there was a hanging wound. Dan's turn, he did what Chaos does, and he advanced. Because his Marauders had deployed early behind that hill on his side of the table, his Sorcerer Lord wound up going in there for the +1 bonus, but was very out of the game, at least initially. So they went hard towards the middle along with the full Chaos Knights. The Nurgle spawn only rolled 3 inches, and so it just pivoted to where the Griffin might land to cover that angle. The Killing Blow Corn spawn advanced alongside the Dragon Ogres. Most importantly, the dragon flew out from behind the house and faced the hill with both cannons and the knights. Dan used his magic missiles to destroy the crossbows entirely. Top of 2, I was faced with some interesting choices. In this matchup, my goal was to do as much damage to the dragon as possible before it got stuck in and started scoring points and rolling units. And I wanted to get my hittier elements past the dragon into his softer stuff that I could actually score points from. So the dragon's attention was mostly focused around that hill, and I wanted to see if I could prolong it. So on this turn, rather than leaving the 2 cannons next to each other on the hill and taking 2 more shots at the dragon, I decided to walk 1 cannon off behind the hill out of line of sight, and I mystical pathwayed the other cannon 12 inches away into the far corner. The knights backed up their maximum. With only the knights exposed to the dragon for a charge, I thought this left Dan with several bad choices. He could go into the knights, eat a champion challenge, possibly fight multiple turns, be delayed, or they could flee off the board. He could wind up in a bad position eating cannonballs anyway, as everything else moved past his dragon. So I was willing to sacrifice them for this result. And the steam tank advanced on the dragon ogres and spawn, while the Griffin flew behind the house to kind of pincer those units and see if it could get an isolated combat it wanted. The steam tank had an earthen ramparts up this turn, so I thought it could endure those charges if it had to, and start another round of long grinding down of the dragon ogres and preoccupying the spawn for a while. I should note that this turn my collective shooting and magic did no wounds to the dragon. I did take a shot with the cannon after traveling the mystical pathways, which was a mistake, so I'm glad I didn't wind up wounding it. It does count as moving when you do that teleport. It doesn't exactly say it, so I think there's a question there, but it does count as moving as it turned out. I found out afterwards. So apologies to Dan for taking that shot. Dan's turn 2. His Chaos Lord rolled 2 1s and wound up gaining stupidity. And He did not charge the knights. His dragon ogres did not charge the steam tank, and his spawn did not advance on the steam tank. I think he wanted his killing blow spawn hovering near his other spawn so that they could operate together in case the griffin went in. His other spawn did not have enough movement to go into my griffin. His large unit of chaos knights advanced on the demigriffs. His small pack of 2 remaining knights advanced on the right flank. The wizard's skirmishing cavalry hovered near my 5-pack in order to get within missile range. So he had played it very non-committally as well. For me, this felt like a positive thing because it gave me more time to try to pick things off rather than deal with chaos all at once, where I think the Empire can get very overwhelmed very quickly. On my turn 3, the steam tank took a charge into the dragon ogres. It seemed very likely that it could do some damage and potentially break them. My knights moved backwards. My demis shuffled a little backwards. My griffin thought better of charging the spawn with the supporting spawn so close. And I flew back around out of the dragon's arc to the other side of the building. I figured I wanted to threaten more of the center of the board with the potential to support the steam tank with a flank charge. My wizard flew out of the dragon's arc. I had a window here to teleport the cannon that was in the dragon's arc actually to the side of the board and out of the dragon's arc and give it only the long charge on the knights, but I failed to cast it this time. So instead it pivoted to face the dragon. BSB shuffled out of the path of the knights. I cast Earthen Ramparts on the knights. Their countercharge was not really relevant, giving them a 5-up board, and after shuffling them back, giving the dragon a rather long charge made them far less palatable, I thought. Between my 2 cannons and my dragon bow, I managed to do 2 wounds to the dragon this turn, which was kind of disappointing as he made a 6-up armor save and the window was closing. The steam tank killed a dragon ogre. He took 3 wounds back from them, and the dragon ogres lost by 1, and they did not flee. On Dan's turn, his dragon finally entered combat with that cannon on the hill. Obviously, he took care of it. He overran only 3 inches, and he was not facing anything. His magic missiles eliminated my 5-pack of knights, and he shuffled the knights in the center a bit to angle for both the demis and griffin. His corn spawn, of course, went into the flank of the steam tank. The steam tank took 2 wounds. It did some wounds back to the dragon ogre, didn't kill it, and lost the combat and was pushed into the house. On the top of turn 4, I saw an opportunity. With Dan's shuffling of the central knights, it looked like they had gotten too close to the demigriff unit. I measured it out, and it looked like I had a 13-inch charge to get them in contact, and, well, Dan had aligned his sorcerer to come out and shoot a magic missile right behind them, so this was offering me the opportunity to not only get the jump on those knights, but to overrun into the sorcerer and the marauders behind it. So I absolutely took this charge. Dan expressed that he probably shouldn't have shuffled them quite as far as he did. I have definitely caught myself doing that, where, you know, you finish moving a unit and then you just want to adjust the angle a little bit and you forget to check all your measurements. And in this case, it wound up being a pretty significant oversight. Obviously, you can tell from the way I'm talking that the demis did indeed make the charge. They rolled a 15, got in with the knights. On the left side, the wizard jumped over the dragon on the opposite side of the hill and used Travel the Mystical Pathway on the knights to get them out of dodge. So now the dragon was going to be faced with the choice of either heading back towards the battlefield, ignoring the cannon, or taking itself further out of the battle by addressing the cannon only and staying away from my main units. My hope with the knights was that they would be able to support the steam tank and flank charge the giant chaos spawn. My griffin flew over to support the demigriffs. Once again, my cannon failed to significantly hurt the dragon. However, the dragon bow slipped 2 wounds through on the dragon, and Windblast did 2 more, so the dragon was down to 3 wounds at this point. As expected, the demigriffs completely obliterated the Chaos Knights of Khorne, overran into the sorcerer. On the bottom of 4, the dragon turned around. The sorcerer died to the demigriffs and panicked the marauders. The steam tank went down to the spawn and dragon ogre without killing either. On my turn 5, the demigriffs charged the fleeing marauders. The griffin flew to the corner with the remaining chaos knights to finish them off and keep them out of my deployment zone. Without the steam tank, I decided the knights couldn't handle the spawn, and so I teleported them out of the way to get as far as possible. I also gave them earthen ramparts. My cannon finally managed to slip a wound through, and with 3 wounds left, took out the dragon. On the bottom of 5, the corn spawn managed to reach the knights, unfortunately, and killed 3 of them, but they held. The dragon ogre fled towards Dan's side of the board. The knights in the corner were pretty much trapped. The Nurgle spawn advanced. My top of 6 was all about preserving points. My wizard flew to the other side of the house away from the spawn. My BSB hid behind a hill. My griffin took out those final 2 knights, and my demigriffs went to his deployment zone. I pretty much gave up on keeping the knights alive, and I lost all but 3 this turn. Dan would finish them off on his turn 6, and that would bring the game to a conclusion. We added up the points, and I came ahead with a 14 to his 6. I gained 3 bonus points for the scenario, leaving me on 17 points for this round. I believe a subtle but big part of this game was the fact that the sorcerers were not close to each other, so I didn't have to deal with the puppet, and that let me slip some extra wounds through and get some teleports through that I really needed to keep his dragon out of the game. I think that was a big help for me. Dan slipping up with his movement a little bit, giving me an opportunistic charge with the demigriffs was obviously huge, and it just lined up that I was able to roll that whole corner. And that's just one of those things where something breaks somebody's way and it winds up being the whole battle. Obviously, taking off the dragon through shooting was a huge bonus and sealed the deal on the game. So I ended the tournament with a 3-1-1 record. As I was playing on table 4 and had a substantial victory, I figured I might get a bounce up. My assumption was that the overall victory would go to either Luna or Phil, who were playing at the top table, and they're both excellent players and they have nice looking armies, so I thought best overall was definitely out of the picture. I was very pleased to find out I had won Player's Choice, which was a real surprise. That made me feel pretty good. I think the army is nice looking. I did go back and update every single model in the army that I took. I added highlights, I did rebasing, I made a new display board, touched up some freehand here and there. So I didn't think it was enough to put me at the top of the room, but people really seem to like my army. They definitely like the Clockwork Dragon steam tank a lot, and the Honey Badger demigriffs. So that was a pleasant surprise. I thought it was great that I got an award. As they were calling the names, Best General was given to Phil Carl. He won at the top table. He was undefeated, and they got to second overall. Second overall went to Luna, and I was totally surprised to win Best Overall. So that was a really nice surprise. It turned out I was third in battle overall with a total of 80 points. I got a few best sports votes. My theme was right down the middle. My Empire army was considered an average tournament power level, which I thought was fair. And that propelled me to first by 1 point. One of the benefits of having lost the first round to another good player in blue was that I was not going to run into Phil or Luna because they were likely to be undefeated until the end of the event. So I did not have to suffer a second loss at their hands. I think they both had both the armies and the generalship to pick me apart. So I was able to slip past them via the classic submarine. So there you have it. I felt my list was pretty strong. I don't think Empire are a powerhouse in the old world right now, but they certainly had the tools to field a flexible and solid army. I would imagine there's some version of Archer spam out there that you could really flood the board with speed bumps and a trit using war machines. But the consensus seems to be a cap of 3 of any single kind of unit. Overall, the old world is a very fun game. It is definitely Warhammer. Warhammer is back. I would best describe it as flawed but very fun. And frankly, having played since 5th edition, that is how it has always been. I think we forget how much the community has had to repair the game over time. There might be a more ideal template to follow, some amalgamation between 6th and 8th that would take the best of both worlds. I think, honestly, it feels like we are beta testing a better edition. I hope that their goal is to hammer out some sort of refined version of this game. But until that happens, I am happy to play with this. as long as the community decides to take steps into their own hands and make the fixes that we all see are obviously needed in places. So let me know what you think of this battle report. I'm all ears for feedback. I am sure I have not relayed the games perfectly. I didn't have pictures of every half of every turn. It was also earlier, I think I said I was recording on a Friday after the event, and it has been a couple of weeks now since the event. So not everything is fresh in my mind. This stuff takes a really long time, apparently. This is my first time doing one of these. So I may consider doing it again if I get a positive response and people seem to like it. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Oh, and I almost forgot. Thanks to Todd for running the event. Todd and Young Duke organized it, and thanks to all my opponents for 5 great games.